So first of all, I'm really honored to be at Augmented World Expo. I speak usually every year, but this is the first time I've gotten to do a full-on developer talk. So as an engineer for many decades, I've really wanted to do that. I want to give a quick note of thanks to Deutsche Telekom, my Magenta employer, and of course to the Academy of Immersive Arts and Sciences, which is a nonprofit that I co-founded to focus on inspiring, educating, and recognizing the good work of other people in the XR industry so we can help people lift up their skill sets. And so I'll give you a link to that later on. I really want you to enjoy the content, so what I really don't want people doing is doing this the whole time. So please put your phones down. I guarantee you'll get the links to all the materials and then some. And I really want you to focus in on taking pictures, because we really hate that. So I want you to relax, sit back, and chill with me while I share some ideas. So first of all, I need to get into my chill mode here. All right, I got the superhero cape ready. Got to have some chill music from our friend Alan Smithson. And I'm going to do something never done before at AWE. I'm going to drink a beer live on stage. Please feel free to join in with me. All right, actually it's a Guinness Zero, so I'm cheating. But it's beer o'clock, in the UK, so go for it. All right, so now that I've got my appropriate costume on, I want you to enjoy vibe coding with me. All right, so perfect, we're ready to go. Let's talk a little bit about vibe coding. Vibe coding is really about feeling the flow, about bringing your creative juices and energy to your projects, and really focusing on your vision and less on coding techniques. In many ways, it's kind of a middle ground between rapid prototyping and traditional software development. If you're an old school programmer like me, back in the 70s, I would write programs by actually writing the comments down on a piece of paper, describing the flow of the logic of my application, what I wanted it to do. And then I would go in and actually write the code. With vibe coding, basically you're just writing the comments in a lot of ways, if you think about it. And I'm going to get into the details of that. I like to think of as AI tooling, as it gets more advanced, as a way of augmenting our intelligence, not replacing it. And so you still have to be the vision, the inspiration, the creative thinking behind whatever it is that you want to build. That's super important. All right, so now that we're vibing, I wanted to talk a little bit about what I talked about in Augmented World Expo 2024 was I talked about this concept of Gen XR, using real-time generative AI services to build on-the-fly XR experiences. And when I talked about that, I talked about the idea of imagining if only the only thing you needed to make software was your imagination. This year, that is all you need. You can actually build applications just with your imagination, and that's the exciting part, I think, of vibe coding. So we've kind of leveled up here. Vibe coding is a term that actually came out in late February on X, and Andrej Karpathy was a very well-known AI researcher, coined the term to sort of talk about this idea of sort of hobbyists who don't really have programming skills using AI tools to build applications. And his famous quote is, "Fully give in to the vibes and forget that the code even exists." For me, the concepts of vibe coding and what I hope to leave with you today is this idea of being empowered and fearless and engaging with the technology as an enabler to deliver whatever it is that you want to create. And so for me, like when I actually started preparing for this panel in March, building applications and going through the tools and really understanding deeply the vibe flow, I started to realize how I felt incredibly empowered. I feel like it's possible for me to take any API, any SDK, any new device, any new OS, and day one start building with it. I don't need to go through the learning curves of the past, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. So vibe coding is imagination. Exactly. It's about having fun, right? It's about chilling out, hanging out with your friends. You can even do vibe coding with other people in real time instead of a solo thing. And it's really about letting AI do the boring, tedious junk that as programmers, we don't always like to do. And focusing on the creative and really kind of iterating a lot. Through multiple iterations, you refine, you reinvent, and you ultimately produce a content experience that is just unbelievably better than you would have done if you just sat down and tried to program it all from scratch the first time. Some people harp on vibe coding as a meme, and there's people talking about vibe this and vibe that, and vibe architecting is one of the, I'm a vibe architect like I was a prompt engineer last year. But the reality I like to think is that you're now focusing less on programming and more on architecting experiences, because that's what you're doing. You're describing what it is that you want the customer experience, the user experience to be. So for me, I think that's kind of a better way of thinking about the concepts. And so vibe coding is not just for programmers, it's for everybody else, right? It's for the designers and artists and creative thinkers, but it's also for programmers. Programmers get superpowers. Why? Because programmers understand how to describe things in a logical manner. They understand the nuances of building a commercial application and the features that need to be included. You need to have settings panels, and you have to have an onboarding flow, and you have to have help, and all the different mechanisms that you have to go through to deliver an application commercially, metadata, putting it into an app store. So programmers actually have quite a bit of extra power, if you will. And this is super important. AI tools really just kind of, yeah, I'm not wearing that one, okay? Go ahead. I thought about it, but so AI tools really just make this a faster and more enjoyable experience. And if you are an experienced programmer, you really can get under the hood and deal with it. Now, some experienced programmers that I've talked to who've tried vibe coding, like they tried a beer, they basically would say, well, I tried to build something and the code was all garbage, and the functions didn't make sense. And I got to tell you, just in the 3 months that I've been building applications in preparation for today, the tooling has massively improved, like really noticeably improved. And so iteratively, we're on a journey that will get to a point where we'll actually have agentic vibe coding tools that will, will sit and just crunch through all the error messages, like in Unity where you just see red blurs of text all day long. It'll just sit and crunch through and fix all of those issues for you. So if the tools aren't up to your snuff today, they're going to get there, and they're going to get there a lot faster than you can imagine. Now, what do XR vibe coders need? They need, a lot of support that are very specific things to spatial computing and, building applications with affordance and good user experiences, right? So, we need to be able to build scenes. We need to be able to build assets that are 3D and that have interactivity and animation. We need to have to build shaders and things that maybe traditional mobile app developers or web developers don't think about, right? And understanding the pipeline of building an application that can deploy across multiple target devices. Obviously, we live in a world of siloed OSs right now, more and more coming with Snap OS and Augment OS. And so we have to make choices, and we can use the AI tools to sort of facilitate us tremendously in this process. And so the things that are complicated, the tedious math algorithms and, going in and dialing in, what percentage of a meter this thing should be and all that stuff just goes away. Like, I can't even describe to you how empowering it is to not have to go through, dialogue boxes with like lots of math and numbers and just think about, okay, move that closer to the user. Put that over there and describe things in a sort of more human-centric sort of point of view. So I want to talk a little bit about my vibe stack. So I'm a gamer. I like to think about things in terms of like, if I'm playing a game, I got a party of characters. So this is my combat team that I go into battle with AI with. And so here we have 3 sort of key pieces that we have to use. So one is the IDE, the Integrated Development Environment. That's for programmers. And it's really going to be your core tool that you use to build, a vibe-coded application. Currently, I'm using Windsurf as the primary one, but this will change. And the reason I use Windsurf or Cursor primarily is because they understand through the reasoning models that they enable and also their default reasoning model, they have a better understanding of spatial computing. They understand the concepts of spatial computing better. And so you could try to build applications with like Lovable and Replit and Bolt and all these other tools, but these two, Windsurf and Cursor, right today, are the best for building XR applications. And we'll go into more specifics about that. And specifically, the kinds of things that they handle are things like multi-user coding, rendering pipelines, optimizing for performance and draw calls or latency or whatever. And also, if you're taking a project and you're moving it from one device to another, refactoring a code base, these are the tools that you want to use because they're going to understand the concepts of the functionality of the code that you're refactoring. Also, we have AI reasoning models. So these are models that actually do the work, and it's kind of a combination of a large language model that's translating your input into action, right? To perform the function of building code or operating on code that you already have to deliver the tasks that you're looking for. And I think that you have today in Windsurf, you have a really great base model, which used to be called Cascade Base, but they just changed it to SWE One Light. The thing about the AI industry is they're not really good at marketing terms. Yeah, that's just the reality. But today, that base model is actually incredibly good, and it's free. So you don't have to pay premium token charges to use it to do a lot of work. At some point, you'll start to get comfortable with understanding when the base model is not understanding or reasoning enough for you, and then you can manually switch to a premium model. Some tools like Cursor even have an automatic mode where they'll try to analyze what the LLM has processed and decide which reasoning model makes the most sense for you to use at that time. Claude 4, it's kind of wrapped there, but it says planning. Claude 4 isn't really as good for programming reasoning as I'd like it to be right now, and of course this thing's will change next week. But I use it for planning purposes a lot. I also use ChatGPT for planning. We're going to talk more about that. And there's a ton of generative AI tools, and one of the supplementary slides that you'll get access to talks about Gen AI tooling that might be appropriate for different types of media that you can use. But my go-to tools today right now are Stable Diffusion, 11 Labs, and Blockade Labs for Skyboxes. I'm actually going to demonstrate that later. So, sorry. So in the case of, I didn't mean to do that because now I'm trying to program it. In the case of flowing with the vibe, basically you have a flow that I have where first you think about the idea, brainstorming what it is that you want to build. And actually, one of the things that I do a lot is I brainstorm with ChatGPT. I actually have a conversation with it, and I iterate on that conversation and kind of start to holistically build out the idea. Or I talk to other human beings, too. You can do that, too. Don't worry. And kind of in combination, come up with a really good idea that you can build. And then you do your prompting, right? So prompts can be quite dramatically different in scope. And we're going to talk about a simple prompt that's almost useless, a precise prompt, and what I call meta prompt or prompt chaining. So we're going to talk about that as well later on. For the code, for me, coding is, I really focus on letting the IDE do most of the coding. 95% of the coding by the IDE and 5% by my beer, and we're good. So that's really kind of the thing. And when you get into this more, you'll start to find that one of the big value propositions is the velocity that you can get in taking idea and delivering outcome, right? And you can actually operate in parallel, meaning that you can actually work on multiple sections of an application at the same time by opening up multiple instance windows of the IDE and say, okay, now I want you to work over here, and then you go open another window, and while you're doing that, I'm going to have you go over and work on this. And so you can get multiple tasks going concurrently. And really, you want to be a 100x engineer? This is your way to do it. Again, I think the biggest thing is testing and iterating and kind of improving through that process flow. Instead of doing sort of agile methodology, you're doing it like in a microcycle. So you're like testing and iterating. And I think that is really awesome because you get amazing outcomes. Sometimes you'd end up with feature creep because you go, oh, now I can add this and then I can do that. And I have definitely fallen into that trap. Let's talk about precision in your prompting. So here's an example, a basic prompt. Create ambient underwater sound. And then a based prompt, which, I want a 30-second loop. I want the sound to sound like this. I want it to work in this way. This is when you turn it on. This is when you turn it off. Precision prompting is really a key to getting outcomes that make sense, right? So otherwise, you're just going to iterate on these basic prompts. And you could do this, but you might take 10 prompts to get to the end result instead of sitting there and thinking out, what do I really want to do, and just describing it all as an outcome. And then you also save money this way because you don't have to run multiple token requests to the LLM and the reasoning model to get you there. So here's some examples of XR-specific prompts that you could use. Here's a spatial audio prompt. So I want to create a certain kind of sound. And I want to talk later about how these kinds of prompts can actually in turnkey drive a Gen AI engine to generate the sound for you or the image. So you can automate that with rules inside the IDE so that you don't actually have to go off and create the crackling campfire sound because you've actually described a need for one. It can check inside the data set that you have and go, oh, there's no one here. I'm going to fire up this Gen AI tool, 11 Labs, sound effects, API call. I'm going to generate the file. I'm going to download it. I'm going to install it in your assets, and it's going to be there from now on. And then I'm going to wire it up for you. So literally one prompt can do all of that. And that's really a powerful way of thinking about things. Then we have another example would be an animation trigger. When the player grabs the crystal, animate it spinning up, scale it up, put a glow effect on it, and then go back to an idle state. So this is, again, kind of creating a description of the user experience flow that you want. Here's another example, teleport node. I want to create 3 teleport nodes and providing position, highlight the nodes when they're hovered, label them. So and then I can start to iterate on that. Like maybe they're a little too close to the user, they're too close to each other, whatever. I'm going to change the style of the node. I want to create a different visual effect for it so you can iterate on that. And if you know what that is up front, say it up front and speed up your results. Okay, good. One more example, interaction logic, right? So I talked a little bit about that with the animation trigger. Here's another example where I'm describing certain types of interaction. Pinch, and I want to throw an object, and I want it to arc physically, and then blow up, and reset. And so I'm providing a sort of full loop of interaction description here for this. And there's many other examples. Okay, now I want to talk about what I call meta prompt engineering. So this is not the word, not meta, but the generic meta. I think it's time for a sip of beer. All right, so in my project that I'm going to show you, I wanted to create a skybox that was based on the cover of a comic book. And so the comic book cover image, I wanted to run it into a process to generate a prompt that would then be used by Blockade Labs skybox generator to create the image that I'm looking for, to match the aesthetics and other elements of the cover of the comic book. And I experimented with a few things. I actually sat with ChatGPT and we discussed different potential tools that could be used. And I tried one, which was Stable Diffusion or SDXL. And I didn't really like the results. And I said, look, which tools might be faster because it wasn't performant enough for me. And eventually I said, okay, I think let's go with Blockade Labs. I used it before. Actually, I used it last year in my presentation. And so this is kind of an example of the brainstorming that I went through. This is pieces of it. But I said, here, SDXL Panoramic did a great job, but it's too slow. What other options do I have? And then I said, okay, remember the prompt that we used to generate that? Let's modify that prompt, retargeting now the Blockade Labs API calls. And so I gave it the documentation link. I said, here's the docs. You go figure out how to do this. I don't want to know. I mean, I actually knew, but I just wanted to run this the right way. So I said, okay, here's the documentation. I need a JSON file as an output so I can feed it into the Blockade Labs API. Go read the docs, figure out what the JSON format is, and generate an appropriately structured JSON blob. And then I said, hey, I want you to actually build an API call to yourself that I can say, here's an image of a comic book cover, and I want you to take that, and I want you to process that and create a prompt for Blockade Labs that I can package up and then call Blockade Labs directly to generate the content. And then I started getting into the discussion of optimization. How can I make this faster? And then I got into some discussions about tweaking some of the parameters, and even came up with the idea of caching the assets locally in the application, so that once I generated the image, I didn't need to ever call that generation tool again because I actually had that cover skybox ready to go. And I'm going to show this to you in a second. So at the end, I said, this is really great, but I want to tweak it. And this is where I was refining it. I was trying to get the color palette of the skybox to really match the aesthetics of the comic book cover. And so here, I had a little more detailed conversation with it, and what I ended up with is a little hard to read, I know, but it's basically a call to GPT-4o that says you're a visual scene designer and XR environment expert, and then the content is you're a prompt engineer building API-ready JSON payloads for the Blockade Labs Skybox AI generation API. Given a single comic book page, generates a JSON object formatted for the post, and then here's the endpoint for generating. Your goal is to create an immersive 360 skybox described in vivid stylistic language that captures the mood, style, and setting of the comic scene. And there's a bunch of very specific instructions that would result in an aesthetically correct and pleasing reference. And it also has, here's the required structure. This is the JSON format that's required by Blockade Labs. And so the whole thing, turnkey, right? And so at the end, what I got was, this is the comic book cover, and this is the skybox. And you can see like the color palettes match, the greens and the purples and the oranges are derived from the cover. You can see that it's an environmental skybox, so it's not just taking content elements from the cover and repurposing them, but it does create the sort of environmental effect of like a scary bat kind of feel with houses in the background. It deconstructed the image and grabbed these little elements out, and then through this prompt generated a really cool skybox, right? So here it is inside the project. This is a WebXR project that I vibe coded in a few hours just to kind of show you guys this potential. Here's the skybox. Here's my comic books on the wall. I can grab this comic book cover, and it's going to load the skybox because it's already buffered it from previous generation. And then there's my skybox that you saw earlier. And you know, this digital comic book thing has like cool features, so I can actually read the comic and scroll through it and all kinds of cool stuff. So it's kind of fun. All right. So let's go on now and talk about, I already did the demo, so we'll skip that. I'm going to come back to it actually in a second. So one of the other cool things you can do is you can take sketches. Like when I first saw GPT-3, I think it was, they showed this demo where they sketched out a little web UI on a piece of paper, then multimodal processed that into an interactive website. And I thought, yeah, that's exactly right. And so here's an example where I took an image, I actually stole it off somebody, I don't know whose it is, I forgot where I got it from, to be honest, but I thought, you know, I like the little compactness of this UI layout, but I wanted to make my own version of it. And so I said, I literally just pumped this image in and said, make a layout like this for my application, and I provided some instructions. Yep. And so here is inside the application, you have the UI panel here, and it's, you know, able to, you know, perform all the functions, and I described the strafing and so forth. So anyway, that's really a powerful thing. You can really speed up the construction of user interfaces. One thing to watch out for is context window limits. If the IDE gets, your interactions become very sophisticated, you'll find that it starts running out of the ability to understand what you're doing. And so you need to deconstruct what you're doing into smaller pieces if you get too complex with it, or just reset it, or use multiple instance windows of the IDE to operate in separate contexts. So again, these slides will be available to you because I know there's a lot of text on here, and I apologize. All right, so I want to end my presentation with a little bit of an AI reality check. So the hype. You can build an app in one prompt. No, you can't. It takes a lot of iteration to get things right. I'm not here to hype you guys up. I'm here to give you some ground truth on what's possible and to inspire you to lean in and try these tools out. But if you try to build an app in one prompt, you're a fool. And I don't mean ever. AI does all the coding for you. Not true. It's not perfect. It'll get better, but you still need to test. You'll still get error message. You need to iterate and improve the code. And this test cycle, as I mentioned before, is super important. Anybody can ship the finished app. Now, I can make $30 million a month, MRR. No, that's just not the way it is. You need somebody with engineering expertise who understands how to deploy apps in a store. And this is a classic example where it's like, dude, I just downloaded Cursor. Anybody can engineer now. And then the guy goes, yeah, maybe. And then I literally built something in minutes. Okay, show me. And then he posts a local host. So this is an example of why it really doesn't make a lot of sense. And then the last sort of hype versus reality thing is you can build anything, absolutely anything. And the actual reality today is that it's better for small to medium applications using robust modern frameworks, APIs that are well documented, so you can at least point the IDE to the documentation and have it figure out what the hell it's supposed to do. But that takes away all the learning curve that you have to go through to try to get yourself up to speed. So you need to understand like a higher level what the APIs can do, but you could even have GPT go in and summarize and tell you, what can this do in terms of generating sound? Or what can this do in terms of generating a 3D model? I had to get to the end. There you go. So limitations, but important practical benefits. Idea to outcome, rapid prototyping, code scaffolding. You get yourself up to speed to start building out the application more quickly. Use any API quickly as long as there's documentation. I experiment all the time with new Gen AI APIs and avoid a lot of the tedious, dirty work. I don't need to write another proper case function and the rest of my life. Be pragmatic and balanced about your expectations, but be prepared that these tools are going to get better and better and better. And the last thing is this QR code, this WhatsApp channel. So please scan that. If you have WhatsApp, that's the best way to do it because then it will jump you straight to the channel. It's a read-only channel, and in there I will post the corrected URL for the presentation link so that you can get access to all of the content, because I just found out right before I started that the QR code was broken. I want to point out that there was no M-dashes hurt during the creation of this presentation, and that the beers and the beverages were consumed over a multi-week period, not all at once last night, under professional supervision, meaning myself. Okay. Anyway, that's it. Thank you very much. Cheers.